Hey guys, welcome back to another video. My name is Trevor Steele, a paramotor instructor at Backcountry PPG, and today's video is going to be just a little bit different. This summer I managed to sneak in a lot of incredible adventure flying. This video is going to incorporate a handful of different flights from one of my trips up to southeast Idaho, where I managed to sneak in some of the coolest flying ever. This paramotor adventure is something that I just want to be able to look back on more than anything, and this video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be jumping on here and giving you guys a little bit of a breakdown of the flight, the situation, what I was doing and where I was going, because unlike previous vlog videos in the past, I did not have a GoPro set up for me to talk to. All of this footage is going to be 360 footage, and honestly, a lot of it is going to be very raw, just showing the terrain and the flight itself. I really want to be able to look back on these flights and watch these moments that were so incredibly cool for me, and hopefully they're incredibly cool for you. So if you're coming here expecting to see some insanely well-edited cinematic masterpiece, that is not what you are going to get. You are going to get a very raw breakdown of some of the coolest adventures I've had this year in some of the coolest places I have ever flown. So with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, guys, so flight number one was actually the evening in which we got there. This was like midsummer, early July like 7th or 8th or something like that. And sunset was like 8:50 p.m., which just means that we can fly all the way until 9:20 as long as we've got a strobe. And it was kind of like a feel it out flight. The first thing that I really noticed that was like so cool was at the top of the mountain right next to the runway, which I'll talk about here in just a second, was about 4,000 AGL above ground level from the runway and only like 4 miles or something from the runway. So when you went up there, you had like this perfect glide slope to get all the way back with the engine off. The other thing that I learned very quickly is that the top of this mountain almost always had like a little bit of wind. It was like borderline ridge soarable. So this first clip that you're going to be watching, it's me like almost ridge soaring the top of this mountain at like 9,000 feet or something. And what it feels like in the moment is like I'm ripping up a sand dune or something. Like watching those dudes on paragliding wings or whatever, just like carving back and forth and foot dragging the sand dune. Like that's what it felt like, only I was at like 10,000, 9,000 feet with like the Grand Tetons off on the horizon and a beautiful sunset over like an incredible river. It was awesome. Now, the runway that I've been talking about was actually an RV park with a built-in runway. Now, I'm not going to mention the name of this RV park. I didn't ask if they wanted me to or not. I'm going to respect not just blasting them onto the internet. But if you are interested in that information, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you where they are, what they are. They're super cool. Love paramotor pilots. They're expanding the runway, expanding the RV park. It's awesome. Anyway, so this first clip is really nothing more than me just playing in that wind back and forth, getting a feel for the conditions, the environment, the glider. I'm doing a lot more like stuffing the brakes and surging the wing. That's kind of like one of the things you do when you're like ridge soaring the top of a butte or a sand dune, or in this case, a mountain. And I actually top landed this mountain. There's like a antler at the very top, like a moose antler at the very top. The city mayor is the one that put it up there. He's actually a student of ours. He's probably watching this video. Shout out to you. And anyways, he mentioned it to me the next day, and I was like, yeah, dude, it's such a cool little top piece on the top of the mountain right there. But I didn't get video of me top landing it. The thing with certain stuff like top landing, especially in environments like this where there's so little space up there, is it has to kind of just naturally happen. I tried to top land again and get video of it, but it just didn't work. I couldn't get the lineup right. I couldn't sink in right. I couldn't make it happen. And I'm a really big advocate of letting things naturally happen in this environment. And so because I couldn't get down on video, we only have like a little bit of a cell phone clip of it. Anyways, guys, I'm going to put a little clip here of the next time I'm just talking, but I am going to leave some raw video of me just carving it up on the top of this mountain. So after carving it up for like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes or something, I proceeded to go to idle and then actually kill the motor and just glide my way down. One of the things that's really fun as a paramotor pilot, that this was just like so awesome, was gliding in engine off to your LZ. What made this even cooler is that the mountain was close enough and high enough that I could make glide comfortably with room for error, still throw a few wing overs, sink it in, and land it on the runway, which I just thought was so cool. We are, I don't know, around 6,000 feet or so, a little bit higher than we are here in Utah at this runway. So I was flying a 26 meter Roadster 4. I really wanted to put the Roadster 4 through the paces this summer, and you'll see more of that as this video continues. Greased a nice little landing in there. And with all of that being said, let's roll to the next clip. The next morning, I spent the early morning exploring some of the local area and the lake. Nothing really that eventful or worth mentioning beyond just this. However, somewhere around 10:30 in the morning, the local student that I mentioned that is the mayor of the town wanted me to fly by his cabin to wave at his wife, kids, and him and just give the kids a cool experience. I thought that sounded like a ton of fun, so I did a quick little flyby. I tried not to stick around too long to annoy any of the neighbors, but every single neighbor was outside waving, having a great time, and it was all around just super fun. After waving and flying by, I decided to fly to the top of the mountain again. He had mentioned a very cool lake, not but say 10 miles back into the canyon, that I had to go check out. I wanted to get up above the mountain. I wanted to kind of scope out the area and see what all I was looking at. Where can I explore? Where can I go? I've already looked at the map. I've explored the area on OnX, Hunt, and Backcountry. I know where the hiking trails are, all the outs, but I wanted to get like a bird's eye view. Now, mind you, at this point, it's like 11 o'clock in the morning. It's starting to get thermic. I'm starting to get a little bit of lift, which I think is super fun. And I'm all for thermal flying. After checking out the lake in the backcountry that he had mentioned, I do end up flying there a couple days later. We'll get to that later in this video. I ended up dropping in on that same mountain. I just found it to be so much fun. Carved my way to the bottom. Sadly, the GoPro died, so we didn't get any footage of the landing, but I bet you it was probably pretty good. I didn't faceplant. I know that for sure. So with that being said, let's move into the next clip. All right, so that same night, I took off flying towards another canyon, not the one that had the cool lakes. There were actually 2 different lakes up there and a waterfall that we flew over. Anyways, that'll be in a little bit. This other valley I wanted to explore because it had a nice little river flowing down it that I thought looked really cool. As far as risk management goes, when you're flying into the backcountry, you're flying into the mountains, you do need to think about your engine out risk, not just the landing itself, but the recovery from the landing. Now, in this particular situation, in all of these flights, these were thought through, these were planned. I knew where my outs are. I knew how long I needed to hike, where I needed to go. This particular canyon had a trail at the very bottom that I would just follow all the way back. I also had people on the ground at the LZ that knew where I was going, how long I was going to be gone, and had the ability of tracking me during the flight. So I wasn't just out in the blue. I wasn't just spontaneously, sporadically flying into the mountains. This was calculated. This was thought through. Once I started creeping further and further back into this canyon, what I did notice is I had a little bit of wind blowing up the canyon. And there was this perfect little spot where, again, I could almost ridge soar. I tried for a good 5-10 minutes to just kind of soar myself back and forth and back and forth. And I just soaked up what wind I did have. Something that I find really fun with paramotoring is combining paramotoring and paragliding. They're very similar, but completely different at the same time. Being able to paramotor into some cool spot like this and then go into paragliding mode where I'm just soaring this ridge was just such a cool, special feeling. After ridge soaring that for a few minutes, I ended up climbing up to the top of the nearby mountains. I just wanted to get, again, a bird's eye view of kind of what the situation looked like, what the terrain looked like below me, what line I wanted to fly. That's the cool thing with paramotoring is you get to really pick the line. And the line is essentially what pathway I'm gonna follow all the way to the bottom. Now, I'm gonna stop talking and let you guys just enjoy the clip of me venturing my way down through the bottom and out the other side. Well, after flying my way down to the bottom of the canyon, I actually ended up flying again to the top of that same mountain with the antlers, and I spent another 20 minutes just soaring back and forth. And we've already watched this before, so I won't include a big long clip of that. But on my glide back home to the LZ, I actually did a handful of collapse tests with the Roadster. Now, these are nothing like super crazy. I posted a video recently doing some collapse tests, and those also weren't like anything super crazy. I got a lot of like crap for them being like terrible SIV collapses. You're right, they weren't really intended to be that. They were these feel it out little gentle collapses that I was doing on my way home from the flight as I'm gliding my way back. And you know, with these ones I did pull a little bit harder. I ended up twisting my wrist more. I pulled the collapse and held it for longer. And I'll let you guys see the results of those collapses and they'll speak for themselves. I don't need to really say much more beyond that. And I'll let you go ahead and watch those.
Well, these collapses are something. It does not want to stay collapsed. I will give it that. I got criticism for not doing them hard enough. There's a cute old rock right there. Just weight shift the flying side. Hurts your hands. Ew. Oh, ow. Yeah. Ow, my hand hurts. Alright, I'll stop.
After all those collapse tests, we glided it in, greased another landing, enjoyed a campfire with s'mores, steaks, and all the juicy, good food we could eat. Alrighty, so the next day I ended up sleeping in because at this point I had flown 7-8 hours or more within like 4 days. I had just been flying nonstop and I actually put almost 100 hours in just over the summertime this year. I've been like a flying fool. Super awesome. Anyways, I took off this next day at like 1:30 or something like that. So very much so middle of the day. I wanted to go thermaling. I wanted to hook a thermal. I wanted to reach cloud base. I wanted to see how the Roadster 4 felt in thermic conditions. So I took off and headed for a different mountain range with a little bit lower peaks than the ones that I had been flying. And the reason I headed this other direction is I wanted mountains facing east because it was still earlier in the day, somewhere maybe 1 o'clock I think is when I took off. Anyways, I wanted those eastern facing mountains because I wanted to get the best thermals I possibly could at the start. If you're unfamiliar with thermaling, the sun's gonna rise in the east, it's going to set in the west. So your east facing slopes are gonna get thermic activity first, as they're gonna be the ones that get hotter first. And then they're gonna be the ones that die off first, and the west facing ones are gonna be the ones that last longer. So if you're trying to catch a thermal earlier in the day, you want to go to the east facing slopes. And then as the afternoon rolls on, the sun reaches top dead center and starts to go downward to the west. That is when you transition to the west faced slopes. And thankfully I had the opportunity on these mountains to fly both, but I wanted to fly to the east facing ones first. Now here's the thing with watching thermal footage. It's rather boring. It is a very turbulent experience as that glider is flying through air that is changing in direction and in speed, which is the definition of turbulence. And right off the bat, I wasn't able to really hook anything. It was a little bit frustrating, to be honest with you, because as soon as you start struggling, or as soon as I start struggling to hook a thermal, the thought is always, wow, I just really suck today, which is probably true. I probably was in the wrong spot, riding the thermal horribly, but I was trying. I was trying to milk the lift lift as much as I could, I was at least maintaining altitude. We call that in the thermaling world writing zeros or ones, which is essentially 0 meters per second climb or 1 meter per second climb, given that that means you're still somewhat in the lift. So I was writing zeros or ones, and I just was kind of slowly milking that as much as I could. My thought process here was, okay, it's a little too early. Things aren't popping off quite yet. Yeah, I'm going to the thermal triggers. I am identifying there is a little bit of something there, but there wasn't anything enough for me really to soar up. A good indicator of that is how developed your cumulus clouds are. If you look out on the sky, you'll notice there aren't any really big cumulus clouds. Nothing overdeveloped, thankfully, but everything is rather small, which means it's still early and there isn't a lot of development. The thermals haven't really grabbed shape. They haven't really developed into something that's really writable yet. And so I just proceeded to push on. I used the motor to assist me, and I just pushed into the next ridge, which thankfully brought many more adventures. As I reached this next ridge, I realized there was quite a bit more wind, somewhere between 10 and 15 miles an hour of wind, as my ground speed wasn't more than maybe 15, maybe 20. My average cruising speed on this Roadster 4 is somewhere around 25 miles an hour. So if I have 10 miles an hour of wind, my ground speed is going to be about 15, which is somewhere around there. And once I reached this ridge, first thing you do anytime you encounter a ridge line, anytime you're mountain flying, is identify your wind direction, identify your wind speed. You need to know where the rotor is going to be. You need to know what the situation is. And the best thing with that is to approach above said mountain. Thankfully, when you've got enough wind that it's noticeable, you'll either A, crab, or B, be going really, really slow. Both things can give you an indication of wind direction. So I'm not just blindly flying to this mountain. I already know which way the wind is blowing as I'm approaching it. Once I do approach, I very calmly kind of drop myself in. And on this very first ridge, I actually tried to top land. I do successfully set down, but it was far more turbulent than I was really liking it to be for a top landing. The last thing you want to do when you're a 15-mile hike out to a main road is top land something that's rotorous, top land something that's not going to be a very easy exit. When I'm flying these conditions, I want an easy top landing. I want an easy set down and an easy launch. I don't need to be up there, so there's no reason for me to force anything. So I just took my time. I cruised around. I did end up setting it down, but because the tree line was right up on the edge of the lip, the wind was somewhat turbulent. It was somewhat rotor. There was a little tiny flavor to the wind, which was just more than I wanted for the top landing. I ended up cruising to a neighboring ridge where I did successfully top land, drop the glider, and I spent 5 minutes just chilling, hanging out. I actually used this opportunity to warm up my hands on the exhaust pipe. I don't have any footage of that, but that is what I was doing. As I was somewhere around 10,000 feet, 10,000 feet. Yeah, it was the middle of the day. Yeah, it was July. But still, it gets chilly up there, especially with the wind. When flying paramotors, oftentimes what makes you cold is the airflow, the constant 25, 30 mile an hour breeze blowing on you. So I took this opportunity to kind of warm up my hands. Of course, I had to go to the bathroom. And then I proceeded to launch again into this 15 mile an hour wind. I actually almost got plucked on inflation. If you're not sure what plucked means, plucked is where as you inflate, it lifts you straight off the ground. This is usually because you have stronger wind conditions. But I got it. I maintained control. Glider control saved my bacon that day. And then I proceeded to ridge soar this for a good 20 minutes again. If you haven't noticed, I love ridge soaring. If you've never gone ridge soaring, highly encourage it. In these 10, 15 mile an hour winds, it was more than enough for me to be able to stay up. At times that wind would die down a little bit and I would have to use a little throttle, but most of the time I was able to just kind of stay up and float my way back and forth. I'm gonna let this clip roll for a couple of minutes and we'll just watch me do some ridge soaring. All right, guys, so jumping back on, fast forward maybe 20 minutes. It's developed later in the day. The cumulus clouds are starting to show more signs of thermals holding together. They're getting more powerful. At this point, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be able to hook a thermal and ride it to cloud base. It's just going to be a question of where. It's going to be a question of when. In the world of thermaling, if you're not familiar, there's something called a trigger. A trigger is essentially where a thermal would likely be developed, popping, and rising. And some ideas of what a thermal trigger will be is like a mountain top, where all of the air kind of rising up the mountain ends up on this one central spot, and that is where the thermal is likely to pop off. Well, anyways, as I'm pushing back towards the LZ, I do find one, and I hook it. One thing to keep in mind if you ever do go thermaling is humidity changes how wide, how punchy a thermal is going to be. Here at the mountains, low humidity, which just means that the thermals are going to be very tight. And the reason I mention that is you may notice how tight my turn is. I actually pull the wingtip down basically to the horizon, which is like somewhat counterintuitive to somebody trying to ride lift, like ridge lift or even a thermal, because the idea is keep your wing as flat as possible to ride the lift as cleanly as possible and get as much of that lift as fast as possible. But when the thermals are really tight and they're only so wide, you've got to get into it. And so I just grab on hard. I rip that wingtip into it and I just fly a circle for like 2-3 minutes. It takes me from around 9,000 feet to 13,000 feet, where it spits me out at cloud base. Now, if you're not familiar with the world of paragliding, cloud base is essentially the bottom of the cumulus clouds that day. That is going to be the highest altitude you can reach in the thermals. Everything above that is no longer going to be thermic, as the thermals only go to cloud base. Once I reached cloud base, the whole goal at that point was just to make it back to the LZ. I really only have about a 2-hour flight time in me, maybe 3. In this particular case, I didn't launch with that much fuel, and I actually only burned 2 liters an hour because I was using ridge lift when I was at the mountain and thermic lift when I was away from the mountain. And I managed to milk my fuel burn for like super solid 2 liters an hour. If you're not familiar with fuel burn, average fuel burn at least at 5,000 feet is somewhere around 4 or 5 liters an hour. In the case of riding thermals, I was flying at 2 liters an hour, which is even better than the EFI achieves. But at this point, I wanted to get down. I was hungry for lunch, and I just cruised my way back before setting it down for a nice landing. Okay guys, so the last flight on this trip was definitely one of the coolest out of the entire trip. This is where I drop into that beautiful valley we mentioned earlier with those 2 lakes and a waterfall. Overall, stunning flight. It was an evening flight, took off somewhere around 7:30, sunset somewhere around 8:30, so I didn't have a ton of time. I started by climbing up to the top of the peak that I've been flying nonstop with the antler ears, dropping in on the backside of it because the wind that evening was dead calm. When it comes to a big flight like this, where you're venturing further into terrain, especially dropping in close proximity of the terrain, you really need to nitpick the best possible conditions you can get. In this case, I wanted as little wind as possible, as calm of conditions as possible, and that's part of the reason why I waited so late into the evening, being 7:30 instead of something like 6:30 or 5, is because I wanted to have those conditions as primo as possible. Now, I'm not going to talk much on this clip. I want to let this video just speak for itself as I drop in on this valley, foot drag the river, and slowly carve my way to the bottom. After bringing it home that night and setting it down, that was the final flight of this trip. I thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you liked this style of video. Again, part of the big reason I wanted to make this video is so that I can go and look back on all of these flights. Otherwise, all of this incredible footage just lives on a hard drive that I never touch, never look at, and in some way forget about. If you did like this video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, comment down below if you want more clips like this. If you guys are interested in learning how to paramotor, we do offer a 10-day training course. If you're already a paramotor pilot looking to improve your skills and join myself on adventures like this, look at our adventure training. For more information, visit backcountryppg.com.